Hello, everyone. Once again in the BetBlocker podcast. Today we have Magda, who is a PhD candidate, and we're going to talk about a very interesting topic. It's non-suicidal injury within gambling and gaming. Uh, but before we start, Magda, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? Where are you from? How did you end up here?
First of all, hello everyone, and thank you so much for having me. I am a PhD student in Budapest at ELTE University. I'm originally from Georgia, but I've been living in Hungary for almost 5 years now because I've also done my master's here in clinical psychology. Um, and just because I'm from Georgia, the gambling was the field that I was always interested in because it's a huge problem in my home country. So I really wanted to uh, pursue a field that I could also help my country. So that's how I ended up studying gambling.
Okay, I didn't know about gambling in Georgia. I mean, like very long time ago, I used to work for a gambling Russian company called Marathon Bet. And I'm not sure because we were big sort of in the ex USSR countries, and it's a bit like, okay, so I'm sure that probably it was a market that maybe was targeted back then. But could you tell me a little bit about how is the situation in Georgia in regards to gambling? Do you got a lot of advertisement, or is something that is very common, or not?
It is very, very common, very alarming, to be honest, because how I got into gambling research was that when I was a teenager, everyone around me was just like using their phone or internet to bet, like online gaming, online gambling, online gaming, whatever, and everyone had a loan in the bank. So
Okay.
there was a point that you could just get this very fast loan, like in seconds from a bank, and just gamble it, put it on something, all just with one device from your home.
Okay, so you just could ask your bank for a credit and gamble straight away. It's a bit like, I think in the UK and stuff, you have like payday loans. That is a bit like
Mm.
this company that they are not banks. And they just give you a loan with a really really big interest. And how was the change from Georgia to Hungary? The land. Do you have to do your classes in Hungarian, because I heard that it's a very difficult language?
No way, no. I'm studying in English, thank
Okay.
God, because yeah, Hungarian is a very difficult language, but I did learn a bit just to communicate. It's super difficult.
Okay, yeah, because sometimes I heard a couple of colleagues, you know, speaking Hungarian in the department at the SER. Sometimes it's, oh my God, I don't know, because sometimes with some language you pick words or stuff, but with Hungarian it seems to be, particularly difficult. They're talking and I'm like, I'm not clocking anything.
Exactly. Welcome to my life.
Okay. And how come that you decided to look into non-suicidal injury and gambling and gaming and all these sort of online you know activities?
So from the beginning, when we started with my supervisor to think what were my fields of interest along with gambling, it was suicide attempts and gambling. But then while reading the literature, we saw that, of course, we need more research about this as well. But it is quite extensively researched, and we know a lot compared to non-suicidal self-injury. And non-suicidal self-injury is a very new phenomena, so that's what grabbed my attention. And then I decided to pursue that. I was very interested in that. Um, and then we tried, when you think about it and read the literature about non suicidal self injury, there are many overlapping things that you also read in the gambling literature. Um, so yeah, we decided to go to that direction.
Okay, it's interesting because for example, I work sometimes with gambling companies. I also do my charitable work here at the blocker, and sometimes you get people that they say, oh, there's not enough research, when they talk about gambling and suicide, and like, yeah, you know what sometimes it shows that people don't know, and they just say without knowing there's
Mm.
not enough research. And sometimes when you look for systematic review of gambling and suicide, you may get like hundreds of articles.
Yeah, and that's the thing. When we looked at we wanted to do a systematic review about problem or at-risk gambling and non-suicidal self-injury. We did, but we could only find 4 studies.
Okay. One thing is that many people that may be listening to the podcast may not know what's a systematic review. You know, what's a systematic review? For the non-scientific people that may be listening to us.
Okay, let's say it like this, that we systematically review all research that has been published for years and years along anything that we can reach, that focus, for example, gambling and non-suicidal self-injury in my case. So we search different databases, different places online, in libraries, and we just collect all the research that has been done about this particular very narrow subject, and then we analyze it thematically and see what's going on.
Okay, like, because sometimes when you look for research, you type something and you get like, you know I don't know, like 1,000 papers. Probably if you look for suicide and gambling, you may find you know two, three, 400 papers,
Mhm.
or even more. But when you said that, okay, you did search for non-suicidal self-injury and gambling, you said that you found four only. So that's
Yes. Yeah, and I think that is because maybe I'm a bit fast forwarding on what we're going to talk about, but I do think it's because there is still no clear distinction between suicide attempt, suicide ideation, and non suicidal self injury.
okay. Could you sort of give us a bit of the difference? Okay, what's one and what's other? How would you?
Okay, let me just start with what is non suicidal self injury,
Mhm.
NSSI, as we call it for short. It's a clinical term for deliberately damaging your body tissue. It
Mhm.
includes behaviors like cutting, burning your skin, scratching, interfering with wound healing, banging, and etc. But without an intention to die, so without any lethal intention. The main motivation would be to cope with emotional pain, but these people really don't do it to die.
Okay. Okay, so there's a difference between NSSI and suicide. That the intent is to
Mhm.
stop stop living.
Yes, yes, that would be the biggest distinction.
Okay. I'm thinking, because again, there's not much research, and you talk a little bit about the motivation why some people, may cut themselves, may burn themselves, may pick, injuries, or hurt the pinching is, or do the biting themselves and stuff like that. Okay.
Yes.
And you said to have a bit of what was your explanation? What, or after reading and doing your research, why do you think that people do this
Well,
type of behaviors?
mhm. It has many, many functions because
Mhm.
it really, like everything, depends on the person. But the most common function of engaging in this behavior would be to cope, to alleviate pressure, to deal with something very emotional. But also, there is a common myth that people who self-injure do this for example, attention seeking.
Hmm.
It's really not true if you look at the literature, because these people really try to hide it. They really try to hide that they are engaging in this kind of behavior. Also, they can do it because of the self-punishment or to feel that they are in control. So it's a variety of reasons, but main one is emotion regulation.
It's really interesting because this sort of thing, like, okay, if you're really anxious or upset about something, it's be like, okay, if I hurt myself, it's a way to break those thought patterns. Be like a hack, on the sort of system. Okay, I'll do this. This is harmful, but maybe for the person it's more painful. The pattern of thoughts that they're causing suffering. Okay,
Yes.
I remember, and this really, stuck to me. Remember, when I was working at Sussex University, I had to take the train, from Brighton to Sussex, to Falmer. Was the campus that, and I remember once, like I saw like like a young lady. I think probably was like a student, and she was, covered, like in scars, both arms, you know, and her dad was sitting next to her, and I was feeling, oh my God, poor little soul, and poor dad, she must be suffering a lot to do that to herself. I never have seen anything, like, completely covered, from the wrist till the shoulder, both arms, both sides. Was like, wow.
Yeah.
Um, what sort of is there any sort of common things that have happened to people that engage with this behavior? Like trauma or any sort of underlying issues, like, because I remember that,
Mhm.
for example, this person look also very very thin, so I thought that, okay, maybe she also have a, that was on the train, was not, I thought maybe she, must have, like, self harm plus maybe some eating disorder, or you know and other stuff. I
Mm.
thought that, okay, now this person is probably really in trouble. Yeah. So, what sort
Mhm.
of things do we have, or do we find in the background of people that self injure?
So, according to my research and what I've read, for now we know that adverse childhood experiences is a common theme among these people. Uh, Emotional dysregulation, they have difficulty managing their emotions in any other way. Also, there is an association between depression, anxiety, uh, and as you mentioned, in eating disorders, the prevalence is way, way higher.
Okay.
Uh, and what else? Something else was coming to my
I
mind.
mean, that was just a hunch, that I had back
Mhm.
back then. So, this must be a bit of, I don't know. Maybe it helps with the food craving. Okay,
Mhm.
I'm hungry, but I don't want to eat. Okay, I'm going to cut
Or
myself.
maybe to get rid of the shame or guilt that you have after engaging in something. Uh,
Yeah. Uh,
and I would also say, sorry, maybe borderline personality disorder for sure, because for a very, very long time, until last few decades, non-suicidal self-injury and self-harm was one of the symptoms of borderline personality disorder, and no other disorder has that. So if you self-injured, you were automatically
they put you in
suffering from
the
personality.
disaster box that, okay, we don't know what to do with this borderline personality disorder. Okay. what about the stigma? Because it's a bit like I think you mentioned at the beginning. It's a behavior that maybe have more stigma because they're seeking attention or they don't really want to harm themselves, but it's a different uh, behavior, than like uh, trying to die by cutting
Mhm.
themselves, or attempt of suicide, sort of different, and maybe stigmatized as attention seeking, even if many of them they try to disguise, that they're hurting themselves.
Yeah, I would assume that stigma would play a very important role in that and a damaging role because yeah, you hear that if people self-injure, they just want to be in the center of attention. They are just seeking for attention, and that's the only reason. Which, in reality, of course, it's not true in majority of the cases, and it just signals very high emotional distress, and it's not just for attention seeking.
Mm. Yeah. uh, I wanted to ask because you mentioned that you were a clinical psychologist. Have you seen this sort of cases in your practice, or you know or I also wanted to ask you, okay, so imagine that, okay, you're a parent, or you see that your partner or a friend is have fresh marks. What would you recommend, or what? mean, the obvious is, okay, go on and seek some help or talk about it, but what else a bit more in depth, if you have experience in this area, you could recommend.
Yeah, to be completely honest, I don't have experience in that area for now because when I was interested with NSSI, I'm more into research
Okay.
during my PhD. But from what I've read and from research, uh, cognitive behavioral therapy would be very suitable and very helpful for this kind of behaviors. And if you ask me personally,
Yeah.
my first question to this person, if I see someone around me, would be to identify what the intention was of doing this behavior. Like if I see someone with fresh cut marks that is close to me, the first thing would be to make sure that it was not that they wanted to kill themselves or something like this.
Okay, for example, what sort of response you'll get. For example, if it's obvious, if somebody say, okay, I cut my wrist but not very deep because I want to die, but
Mhm.
maybe I didn't cut deep enough, or maybe I was afraid, or the pain stopped me. But
Mhm.
I suppose that the person that you know is suffering from NSSI, it's a bit like different. So I want to stop thinking about this, or I don't want to, you know, or
Mhm.
I want to be in control, of the way I feel.
Yeah,
Uh,
or just stop being numb and just feel
Again,
something.
feel some. Yeah, that's another thing. Like feel something. Feel a bit like,
Mhm.
a bit like, it's, yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. uh, what about the connection between gambling and this type of behavior? What, reading, you know the
Mhm.
articles, and probably also doing some reading, on you know NSSI, apart from gambling and gaming, and reading your gambling and gaming stuff.
Mhm.
What are your sort of links there?
Hmm. So first of all, I would say that they seem very, very different on the surface. You could say that one is about money and the other is about physical harm, but both can act like emotional escape, and both can be the way of saying that I can't cope right now. And I would say that they share some underlying mechanisms because they can be triggered with some emotional stuff, stress, trauma, or shame. They kind of repeat the same cycle of having this urge, then acting on it, then feel this temporary relief, then feel guilt, and this vicious cycle is just going on. Also, we know that both are connected to impulsivity, especially urgency, past trauma or low self-esteem, and of course, most of all, the emotional dysregulation.
It's interesting because it's like, my first thought, the link, is emotional regulation is, oh, I feel anxious or I feel bad. Okay, if I go and I'm playing slots or something, I sort of turn off, the feeling bad or being worried or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And the same, I suppose, a person that is not feeling well, I don't know if you're burning yourself with a
Mm-hmm.
cigarette, probably you cannot think like, oh, I have an exam next week and I'm going to fail. You're like, oh, fuck, this is hurting, and then you got all the rush of you know
Mm-hmm.
you know adrenaline, cortisol, dopamine, internal opioids, etc. So it's really interesting. What is the current treatment, in this sort of cases? Because, for example, one thing that I always roll my eyes a little bit is like, for everything is CBT. It's like, and it's like, okay, CBT is always recommended because it's really easy to do research with uh, with CBT, in the sense, okay, that you follow some step, you pass some questionnaires before and after, and then you show that, okay, there's an improvement. While if you do, I don't know, internal family systems or psychodynamic or gestalt or any other thing, okay, you probably can do a case study and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe it's quite difficult. It doesn't take like 10 weeks or 6 weeks or 14 weeks. It's like, oh yeah, it's like 2 years. I mean, like, you're not going to have like a research group going for like 3 5 years, to with a very small group with the same. I mean, it's not feasible. So, apart from CBT, I mean, if you have a friend, that was in this situation,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, would you say, okay, Rosette said that CBT is,
Imagine. um,
or suggest, Rosette suggest, never says,
uh, no, I think, um, but this is also kind of a CBT technique now that I think about it. The delay, I think it's a very important part, like a bed blocker, for example. You
yeah.
know,
I mean, this sort of thing is a bit like, you know, I mean, BetBlocker is not a silver bullet. It's a bit like, okay, you install it in your phone. You want to go to a gambling website, you can. Okay, if you're really motivated, you'll find the way, or you reset your mobile to factory settings, and then you need to reinstall your banking apps.
mhm,
You
mhm,
delete all your pictures. I mean, people don't want to do that. So probably you try to go, you can do it, and that's okay, and then the next day you're happy that you didn't do it. So I suppose it's a bit the same, but I suppose that there's no burn blocker or cut blocker. That's a bit more difficult, and there's
mhm,
probably many you know people probably they can be quite creative. You can scratch yourself with a fork or pin yourself,
mhm, mhm.
and you cannot just have sporks in your home.
Yeah, but why I wanted to make this kind of um, comparison is that, for example, there was one success story that
Uh-huh.
I've read about a young girl who was struggling with non-suicidal self-injury. And right here, I would say that statistically, girls, females are uh, cutting themselves more, and males are banging or engage in other kind of behaviors. So this was the girl who was cutting herself. And with the therapist, they came up with something that they put everything, like the coping stuff, in one small box, and they put this box somewhere far away in the closet. So every time when this girl would get an urge to cut herself or burn herself, she had to go through all this, going to the closet, reaching for the box. Then there were like so many tools that she could do first, some notes that she was writing for herself, and
Mhm.
until she would get to the blade or a lighter or something like that, the urge would, go away, kind of.
Okay, that's really interesting. A bit like, you can get, and I suppose, that people may have their tools. I
Yeah.
mean, you may have like a razor blade. Okay, I don't know, maybe it's clean or whatever. So, I mean, maybe I'm just imagining stuff. But if I was to do that, probably have,
Mhm.
some proper self-harm tools.
Mhm.
And probably if you have like, a rusty blade, okay, I don't want to use that, because I don't know if I'm going to end up with septicemia, and I don't want to die. What I want is to, or a lighter, okay, I use this lighter because it leaves a type of mark, or it
Mhm.
burns, to a level of pain. I don't know, so suppose that, is what you said, that not everything is, you know you can use everything. It's okay. Not going to use a butter knife, to cut yourself. Okay. You were saying that that there's sort of some gender difference, that women tend to cut themselves more, and guys tend to bang themselves,
Yeah,
like punch
bang the
themselves.
fist on the table or on the wall or
Again, okay.
something like that.
What about, for example, is you know getting into fights could be something, you know
Mhm.
or
Um,
not really.
Not really, because for it to be non-suicidal self-injury, it has to be body tissue of your own that
Okay,
you're damaging yourself, and the effect is like immediate.
so it's self-inflicted, so
Self,
it's
yeah, exactly.
so it's not like you can just tell somebody like, oh, you're whatever, expecting to get punched or
Yeah.
something like this. Okay, self-inflicted. Okay, why do you think that guys, bang themselves, and women cut themselves?
Hmm. Mm,
Your
well,
hunch, it
I would
doesn't need to
say,
be.
yeah, with my hunch and my cultural background, I would say that males are mostly taught to suppress their emotions and
Mhm.
stay strong, and all of this stuff. And this might lead to internalized distress and anger or aggression. So I guess they are just doing it to release anger, to punish themselves, or to regain control. While in women, in my opinion, it would be more about dealing with anxiety, sadness, stress, something interpersonal.
Okay. And in your research, what did you find, the link between gambling, and this type of behaviors? Are gamblers more likely to, to engage with this type of behavior? Is it use? I don't know, because my one of my thoughts is, okay, I have the urge to gamble, you know if I burn
Mm-hmm.
myself, or punch my, maybe will go away,
Mm-hmm.
or there's not that type of relationship. It's okay, they both coexist, or
Mm-hmm. So we still don't have any longitudinal studies to see the direction of the relationship, uh, and which causes which, but we do know that from these four studies that have been conducted, two of them were about adolescents. And non-suicidal self-injury is way more prevalent in adolescents as well.
Mhm,
We saw that gambling was a predictor
mhm,
of engaging in non-suicidal self-injurious behavior. And we know that people who self-injured,
mhm.
adolescents, had way more permissive and free views about gambling and engaging in gambling. And with my own research that we're doing it in adults, we're in the initial phase, but we did some statistics already. We saw that around 60% of our participants, these are people who gambled in last year, were engaging in at least one non-suicidal self-interest behavior or
Okay,
have engaged.
okay, like okay, so like I don't know because I can understand sometimes or you see like gamblers okay they lose a lot of money in the bookies they might punch yourself they may some sort of self aggression
Mhm.
it's actually okay it can be something to deal with the shame afterwards.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
But it can also be the other way around, kind of when
okay,
you're
a
sad
bit of
and
yeah, it's been like this sort of snake that eats his own tail. Uh,
yeah.
okay, and you said that you're conducting some studies. I know that maybe sadly, must be difficult. Because must be a lot of stigma. So okay, I want to research people that gamble, something that already have a stigma, and people that have engaging with NSSI
Mhm.
probably have a lot of stigma. How do you find people to participate in this type of study? Must be difficult. You may have organizations that you know maybe not as helpful as they could. How is
Mhm.
it going?
So what we do because of all these reasons that you mentioned is a cross-sectional study where people just anonymously can uh, fill in the questionnaires and share their experiences.
Okay, so it'd be like I don't know, like gambling survey, and then you say, okay, do you ever cut yourself? Do you ever burn yourself? Do you
Mhm,
ever punch
mhm,
yourself? Do you, like, don't know, bite yourself? And
mhm.
like,
Yes, we have not we, but there is this statements about non-suicidal self-injury, which is very widely used in research. And first part of it asks participants, people, clients, how many times approximately they have engaged in this specific behavior, like how many times have you cut yourself, burn, etc. Then it has a second part, which is super, super interesting, that is about some questions, for example, if you're do you engage in non-suicidal self-injurious behaviors when you're alone? How much time elapses from the urge that you have to self-injure and when you're acting on it, which was in our case less than 1 hour.
hmm
It's a very, very surprising result. If they want to stop engaging in this behavior. And then it's all about functions, like why do these people do it? For emotion regulation, for, I don't know, dissociation, etc.
okay. And how's it going so far?
It's a very difficult thing to always think about this stuff. It's so depressing sometimes. But we have more than 1,000 participants now.
Well, that's
Uh,
not bad. I need 10
yeah,
participants for my study, and I'm struggling to get them on
yeah.
board. You know.
I can
So
imagine
it's
that since this like a
it's
survey, it's
yeah. I mean, even with with surveys, within gambling, it's a bit like because they have engaged with gambling, they're used to get a lot of free stuff. Okay, if you reply to this email, we gave you 100 spin.
yeah.
If you do this, we give you a bonus. If you give this, and then say, oh, would you like to do a service? And what am I getting? Oh, it's for science. Screw science.
Bye.
By yeah, it's tough sometimes with get them to participate. Do you do any sort of incentives? Okay, if you complete the survey, we give you a voucher or
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. We give them vouchers, as I know, because my study is part of a bigger study. I will just be working on gambling and non-suicidal self-injury, but they are filling a huge questionnaire and they are getting Amazon vouchers.
Okay, so there's a big set of data, and you're going to
Mm.
work only with a part of it. I mean, I think that's also a nice thing because okay, you probably have a few of you trying to recruit
Yeah,
and
yeah,
all of that. So it's not just okay.
mhm.
That's good. With your PhD, what would you like to achieve? Because I suppose it's not just only about to say, okay, I'm going to help, people that they're suffering from both, or or I'm going to. What do you expect to get out of all of this painful process? I think it's a bit of you know a bit of a self-inflicted injury sometimes, like
Yeah.
doing
Uh, yeah, I would say maybe kind of break stigma around it because we need to talk about non-suicidal self-injury. Not many people know about it. Not many people know what it is connected to, for example, gambling. Uh, Raise awareness, I would say, to let others know, to do more research about it, to break this stigma and shame, because shame is the biggest blocker of seeking for help or something like this.
Yeah, I always say like shame is so toxic, because one of the if you don't look for help because you need think that okay that you're going to be judged or whatever, you're in a bit of a catch-22. Okay, you're in a bad situation, and you're not going to seek for help, and if I'm honest, I don't think in the general population, you normally see like people that self injure, I don't know, you have the idea of the, I mean, and this is my sort of archetype of, okay, you get the emo kid, just, black hair, I mean,
Mm,
that's, cutting themselves, burning themselves, saying, okay, life is pain, and, but, I think it's a bit of you know, a simplistic, archetype that maybe, you know, as I look, it's a lot of people that they don't know how to deal with the emotional pain. What can we do to
cool.
make things easier.
Mm.
And in terms of age range, because this is another thing. I always imagine that okay, it's a young person. Do you get older people, doing this type of behaviors?
Yes, yes, definitely. It's way higher in adults. To talk numbers, it's like uh, I would say from 17 to 33%.
Oh, wow.
With adolescents, yeah. In general, population and adults is like 5-6%, but it still exists, and of course, it's significantly higher if it's a clinical population.
Okay, it's interesting because I think the pain has a bit of a cathartic, you know, something. I remember like a long time ago. I was, I think I don't know, maybe like 20 years ago. I was watching this TV show. I think it was MTV or something. That was LA Inc.
Hmm.
And we got this tattoo artists like in a studio and say, oh, I want to, people they really had psychological problems a lot of times. So my grandma died and this, and we were very close and want a picture of or the dog, or you know there's something about pain, that helps with physical pain, that helps with other stuff. Or like also you think about cultural
Hmm.
stuff, okay, like this sort of rite of passage, where someone needs to, I don't know, get some ants, in a, that they're poisonous or something. I mean, they don't kill you, but you go through pain.
Hmm.
Or people that YouTubers, say, okay, I'm going to let a scorpion sting me, oh my God, so painful. I mean, like, must be some, release of some emotional pain. What are your thoughts on that? This, okay, then does it have a healing property, or is just a bit of a catch 22 that, okay, if you get into it, you just.
Mm-hmm. So first of all, since you mentioned tattoos, I kind of forgot to mention it. With non-suicidal self-injury, we also explicitly state that it's a behavior that is not socially sanctioned, like tattoos or piercings. So that is definitely exempt for it, even though they are very similar at some point. And yeah, I think biologically, when you feel pain and all these hormones and stuff are releasing inside of you, you kind of regain control or you forget about what's going on. Like even uh, us uh, personally, if I don't know, you burn your hand, you completely, forget everything else. You just focus on this pain for a bit.
Yeah, it's a bit like it's a hack, it's a bit like, okay, you're really, you know burn your hand, and it's like, oh, that's it, stop there, you know but what I was thinking, is there a way that, okay, it doesn't need to be a recurring thing, okay, you're upset about something, like bang something, and
Mm-hmm.
that's okay, and then you talk about it, or because if it feels like something very, very primal, okay, somebody lost a lot of money on a slot machine,
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's, okay, that's, it's angry, wants to punch the, but also, the pain, is something that can be,
Mm-hmm.
quite grounding. Okay, so it's interesting, the sort of age thing that is a bit older than, because you think a bit like late teens or something, and that, people, they grow out of, feels a bit like, or that maybe it's like a phase, but I mean, like, is there sort of a time where people sort of stop self-harming and move on to other behaviors, if there's something that normally, for example, in terms of prognosis, a
Mm-hmm.
person that self-harm, what's the prognosis? Are you going to keep cutting yourself forever, or there's a point that, okay, people transition to other ways to cope with emotional pain? That's okay, don't have the age to drink, so I cannot go and buy a bottle of vodka. So when I'm, I don't know, like 21, I maybe harm a bit less, and I use legally sanctioned drugs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I would say that like some other behaviors that people use for coping, it can also become a habit. Um, so if you don't ask for help at some point, I think it's a self-reinforcing cycle, and then you might be doing it for a very, very long time.
you know
Even though it starts in adolescence, yeah, as I said, there are like 6% of adults who do it. So,
you
um,
know it's quite interesting, because it's a bit like gambling. People, they start gambling because of, fun, but the people that maybe progress into a pathological, you
mm,
know
mhm,
relationship, okay, because sometimes it's feeling, fulfilling another function, okay, maybe dealing with, some sort of discomfort or psychological pain, and it's a bit like, okay, you get into a circle that, you're stuck, in it,
mhm. And this emotional roller coaster makes this behavior more addictive over time.
Yeah. Okay, it's interesting, because I was thinking, is it an addictive behavior?
Mhm. Well, we are still learning, but there are many, many, many researchers who are conceptualizing non-suicidal self-injury as an addiction and in addiction framework, because as I said, there are many similarities. You have the urge to act on it. It's very fast, less than 1 hour usually. It creates this vicious cycle that you have this feeling of relief, negative reinforcement plays a big role, emotion
Mm.
regulation. So there are many, many similarities, and people are also doing research about that. But for now, in the DSM, we
Uh-huh.
have it listed as a condition that requires further study.
Okay, so it's on early stages.
Mm.
Probably we'll have it on the DSM 6 or 7.
Yeah, it was proposed to be a distinct diagnosis, like no suicidal self-injurious disorder. So let's see.
Okay, let's see. But I can see, to a certain extent the similarities.
Age
So
of onset as well.
yeah, there's anything that you know we haven't talked about that you think is very important, or in
Mhm.
this area that you say, oh, this is something that I would like also to mention that you haven't asked me about. Or...
I think I would like to mention the connection with
Mhm.
suicide attempts, because it was found that even though they are very distinct from each other, from research we know that non-suicidal self-injury can be a predictor or precursor of future suicidal behavior. So it is very important to pay more attention to it and to catch it on the early stage, I would
So
say.
it's a bit of an additional type of vulnerability, a bit
Mhm.
with gambling. Okay, maybe there's no causality, but there's some level of correlation. It'd be like, okay, maybe in some cases there is, and
Mm.
the don't. But as you say, there's a lot of more research that needs to be done.
Yeah, for sure. And I think
So
prevention is very important
okay,
because as it starts in young age, it's
okay, do you mind if we talk a little bit about prevention?
no, of course not.
Okay, because for example, in gambling, you get a lot of sort of prevention campaigns, and you get this sort of, I don't know, like charities that they do like some, awareness, like they talk about sex, drugs, bullying, knife crime, gambling, you know, mental health, it's something that, again, is there anywhere where they do talk about or any type of prevention or
No, I haven't seen anything like this while I was doing research. Like there are some strategies and some things that can help, but I haven't seen it advertised anywhere for now.
okay, because with gambling you get this sort of thing a bit like a double, I don't know, like it feels a bit weird because if you talk about gambling, you got people that, oh, this is going to incentivize gambling, if you talk about gambling hard. So suppose probably it's the same, if you talk about sex in
Mhm.
schools, oh, now they're going to want to have sex you know but it's okay, what do, damn if you don't, damn if you do, damn if you don't. Or smoking, or about vaping, okay, so you need to tell them, okay, look, it's not completely innocuous, you're getting yourself addicted to nicotine, you can have popcorn lung, or whatever, so I suppose that some info is necessary. What's the prevalence of this type of disorder in the general population?
In general population, it's but in adolescents, as I mentioned, it's way more. It's from 17 to 33, 34%.
Mhm.
But in a clinical population, it reaches as much as 80%.
Wow. So this, yeah, it sounds like it's not a small chunk. It's like, okay, pretty much anyone that had mental health problems may do
Hmm.
some self, non-suicidal self injury. So it's something that is like, wow, 80% in clinical population is, pretty much almost everyone. Yeah,
Huge number, yeah.
yeah,
Very alarming.
yeah, no, it's very very alarming. Okay. Uh, so I wanted to say big thanks, to sharing your time on a Friday. We probably could be out doing something. So thank you very much, and I hope your research goes well.
Thank you so much for having me.